experiencing and have been experiencing over the last couple of months. I don't want to spend too much time there. I definitely want to spend most of our time talking about our path forward, reimagining your new normal, how better ways to collaborate, avenues of collaboration, and then of course, becoming better than we were before and using our current situation as an opportunity to be better. So our first topic is the initial upheaval, and we're all experiencing unforeseen circumstances, both personally and also in our professional lives. And it can be really overwhelming to feel like you're dealing with that on your own. All of us have heard the phrase, we're in this together, but what does that really mean? And over the last couple of weeks, couple of months, Mosaic has heard a lot from our clients. They're experiencing fear and frustration of just not knowing how to navigate the new world that they're finding themselves in. And rather than just saying, we're in this together and we understand your experience and those types of things, we really wanted to do something. We wanted to take action. And that's where the idea for this webinar really came from. We wanted to pay it forward to the legal community, not just to our current clients, but also just the community as a whole. We have been in business for 20 years. We have past clients that we really wanted to be there for and talk through. And we have a great network of clients, David and Sadia being two of them. So I asked them to participate in this webinar with me and to share their experiences, to give advice, and just to provide a perspective that gives everybody a path forward. So that was really our goal today. And my hope is that after this hour that we're going to spend, everybody has that fresh perspective on how to make their departments better than they were before. As Colin said, I encourage you to ask questions. We really want this to be as interactive as possible. You're going to see that my slide deck is very simplistic. I'm not really into bullet points and things of that nature. I really wanted this to be very conversational. So I do encourage you to please ask questions as we go here. So the first topic that we have is reimagining your new normal. And I want to talk about that path forward. And the first thing I want to do is ask Sadia some questions. I'm also going to ask David some questions. My first question is for Sadia, and I just want to hear from you in how your new normal is working out and how you're working with remote workforce, how that's impacting your department, what positive changes you've made to be able to have your department staff communicating better with one another.
As you, Alicia, mentioned, it's been an interesting year. And now, you know, like the new norm is pre-COVID and post-COVID, right? And pre-COVID, we had all these plans, which did not come into fruition, as we all know. It seems that, you know, we are in a different territory. And as a result of that, you know, relationship building has been my number one goal in the past couple of months. And, you know, relations from the perspective of checking in with our employees to make sure everyone is okay, to make sure that we have a balanced workforce. We're no longer in an office environment where you could walk up to someone and get a feel for, you know, the workload, how the person is dealing with. Are they near the brink of a burnout? And because, you know, we're not able to be together physically, now than ever, you know, it's so important to keep in touch with your employees, to do video conferences, to be able to read that body language that you don't generally get over the phone. And the other aspect of it is also making sure that, you know, your outside counsel, that you keep close eye on not just the spin, but also relationships. It's so important that you consolidate firms, you know, than in the past. Right now, what we're seeing is that in the industry, there's a lot of spending cuts that are coming through, initiatives cuts, and you have to come up with innovative ways to manage what you have and stretch the dollar, so to say. So it's been an interesting year so far.
Thank you. So David, you and I had an opportunity to talk a little bit, it's been about 2 weeks ago now, about outside counsel having this need to become more dynamic. Can you elaborate a little bit and give us some insight into the changes that legal departments should be expecting from their vendors?
Yeah, thank you for that. Listen, I would say a couple things. For me, it's helpful to think about not the new normal, but the next normal. And so when you think about what are we facing today, we are facing businesses that are facing unknowns, risks, more complexity, more challenges with fewer resources. And as someone who's been in the legal ops space for now 20 plus years, like that was so 20 years ago, right? That happens every year. And so part of what this evolution is just a heightened awareness of those things that a lot of law departments have been working on, but also a lot of law firms have been working on. I guess the most and so a lot of what we now focus on is, how do we actually take advantage of the work and the things that we've done in terms of our relationships and in terms of delivering legal work and building capabilities within our firms to meet our clients where they are during this next bump that happens to have presented itself. And a lot of what you and I were talking about, Alicia, and I think worth mentioning here is that the time to have done the work, to have laid the groundwork, has happened in a lot of instances. And so what I also think is that if you haven't had those discussions, that those relationships will actually accelerate faster this time because we're starting to get muscle memory in the system to actually address some of those needs.
Thank you. No, that's a great perspective and good points. And Sadia, you and I also had some opportunity to sit and chat with one another last week, and we were talking about steps for improvement. And to David's point, this is going to be sort of one step after another. It's figuring out where we are currently, and then, okay, what's next after that? And what are you doing within your department as we're going through these steps to look at new improvements for your department in process, in technology, and efficiencies as you're trying to navigate your staff not being there with you all of the time? How are you working through those things?
I think one of the things that we're really encouraging people is to ask questions, raise your hands, before it becomes too overbearing or too overwhelmed, to ask questions and knowing that you're not alone in this. And what we mean by that is not just saying it, but following up with actions. For example, for us, what we are utilizing is bringing in different types of consultants. And I know that we have worked together many years when it comes to, not being afraid to offshore some of the resource, the work. For example, we have engaged with your firm to help us with strategic setting, with technology improvement. How can we better utilize the system that we have for e-billing? And in addition to that, what we have done is, rather than doing some of the work from the US, we actually outsource our billing guideline reviewer, whereas she does the day-to-day reviews of the e-billing, making sure that all firms are using leads, especially international firms. As you know, it's not something that a lot of companies like to use, but unless you enforce it, they try to sneak in and see if you're paying attention. And in addition to that, when we're dealing with complex items, we usually reach out to you guys saying that, okay, we have this new challenge. Rather than me trying to figure out, I rather bring in the experts that can answer those type of questions in matter of seconds than me spending hours on it. And the other piece of that we have done from the law firm perspective, what we realize is that our workload has really increased a lot in the past couple of months. We kind of initially assumed, okay, business is going to be down, so we're going to have a little bit of a downtime. But what we realized is business might be down, but our workload has really, really, in some instances, went 3 times the amount of work we used to do in the past. And employee burnout it's a new reality now. And in order to prevent that, what we have done is we looked at our pool of resources that we have, and managed to really move away some of the work from top tier law firms and gave it to firms that are boutique firms that have the expertise in-house and outsource some of that function. And what we were able to do is that we were able to cut the legal fees or the hourly rate by half. But in return for that, we had to make some adjustments. For example, as we had discussed, Alicia, when we first engaged with these new firms, boutique firms, one of the things I asked them was, we're in a different environment today than we were before. And I asked the unreasonable request, which was to give me 2 weeks of free work. And those 2 weeks, we justified saying that it's going to take for me, there's going to be a transition period, right? When you're moving from a work from one firm to the other. And unless you really have a strategy, the bills can go up because you're dealing with giving up this work, giving it to a new firm. But then during that transition, I didn't want to have to pay for two companies billing me at the same time. And initially, since this is unheard territory, one of the things that I was told is, no, we don't do that. And I pushed back, and yes, I didn't get 2 weeks, but I did manage to get 1 week free services. And these were the innovative ways that we've been able to come up with in order to reduce legal fees at the same time, um, balance the workload for our employees from multiple angles.
And that actually kind of blends perfectly into the question that I have for David. So David is obviously on the other side of the coin in this situation, and you are experiencing companies that, or clients that you have that are going through budget cuts, and many of those clients and companies that really any firm is dealing with is looking to renegotiate rates, or they're looking to move work to less expensive firms. And what are your thoughts on those types of initiatives, and should other things be considered when you're going through those types of initiatives?
Yeah, so part of what Sadia was talking about during those conversations is she was trying to align her values and her outcome to that of what the firm was delivering. And I think that's a very important discussion to have. But I would say this, that the discussions we're having today really do reflect trying to get better alignment on what the ultimate goals are and what we're trying to deliver. What work should the law firm be doing? What work should the law department be doing? Or what other methods are there? You know, it very well may be that some of the complex issues you're facing are better served by an organization with an infrastructure to handle those needs in a lot of complex jurisdictions. And that's a cost worth investing in order to get that outcome. Whereas some of the other work some of your law firms may have been doing wasn't properly placed to begin with. And I don't know that that's a function of the actual law firm as it so much as it is the segmentation of the work and how that work should be done, whether it be through a boutique firm, whether it be through a tech-enabled, an ALSP, or whether it be done through actually just driving it back down to the business. And so what I would say is that, you know, as you look at the complexity, as you look at the challenges and the market segmentation of the vendors, of the clients who are asking you to make those decisions, all of those factors really have to come into play, because as you start looking at value versus effort, as you start looking at total cost of outcome, that's really where you start to gain some traction into true efficient handling of the matters, which ultimately will lead to lower cost across the board in terms of settlement, exposure, drag on your business, your ability to start new business lines, your ability to reduce risk. And all of those things, I think, should and have to be weighed in trying to have those discussions with your firms.
That's really interesting, because that's something that we talk to our clients about often, and something that we don't see as much as we would like to. We do implementations and optimizations of matter management systems, and so often we have a situation, and Sadia, you and I have talked about this many years ago, where matters are not closed when they should be. And that small step is really important, and ensuring that you're capturing data that is valuable to you in that process is also really important. And unfortunately, we don't see that as much as we should. closing out a matter and providing, an evaluation on how the firm did, what was the settlement versus what you initially thought it was going to be, what was the outcome, were you satisfied? All of those pieces and those metrics are so important to understanding how successful your firms really are versus just saying, I got a good rate or they stayed within budget. There's all of these other pieces. And unfortunately, we do see that the capabilities of matter management systems are not utilized as much as they should be during the closing process. And I would encourage everybody to take a look at how are you closing out your matters and what data are you capturing? How are you reporting on those pieces of information? Because it's so valuable to you. If you're not, you're really missing a massive piece of the success or non-success of all of your outcomes of your cases. So my 2 cents on that particular topic.
I'd like to add to something because I think Sadia touched upon it. I think it's important. It's one discussion to talk about just having compliance with submitting in a leads file format or how you actually want your information. Really what's being driven there and by the guidelines is a desire and a need to have a full understanding of what you're actually spending your dollars on and how are you measuring success. And oftentimes I find when you have those discussions with your firms up front, it actually does create better resolution in the data, better resolution in what they're collecting and what they're giving back to you, which actually helps you on that journey. Oftentimes firms get billing guidelines that tell the firm what they should or should not do without any context. And I think that lack of context also is a missed opportunity to talk about how we get closer collaboration about what it is ultimately you're trying to get to. And if you think about a firm the size of Baker McKenzie, at any given time, we could have a number of clients in the multiple tens of thousands of clients, each with their own billing guidelines and ideas. And so you can imagine that without really good conversations with our clients about management objectives, aligning of goals, aligning of future state vision, it becomes very hard to kind of share that across the firm and get better at that and to deliver what it is you actually need.
Absolutely. And that pairs nicely into the next topic, which is that collaboration for the sake of all. Collaboration is vital for any vendor-client relationship, but I think that's especially true when we're talking about corporate legal and their vendors. We are relying on our vendors to represent us as the client, and the vendors are relying on the client to provide an understanding of what it is they're looking for and what the goals and objectives are, to David's point. So David is someone who's worked both in-house and now obviously on the vendor side of the equation. What is the advice that you would give regarding improving that relationship? I think you touched a little bit on it, but just elaborating on what the benefits potentially are as far as setting goals and expectations. Are you seeing maybe more conversation happening or more forms that you're being asked to fill out? Is there more going on before that relationship starts?
Look, at what I'm seeing on the vendor side is that the partners who are delivering the work are more eager than ever to figure out how to have those conversations. What are the things they ought to be touching upon? What are the things where, as a law firm, we can lead in the delivery of our legal services in such a way that will resonate with the clients? When I was inside, I think part of what my job was really in the messaging about what are the overall goals of the organization, what are the overall objectives that we're trying to get to, and how do you help us get there? And again, whether it's speed to market, whether it is cost savings, whether it is finding an alternative vendor to do some of the work, that's important. But I think also one of the things I've kind of become more sensitive to is a lot of the problems we deal with in legal are very complicated and they're very complex. And in fact, it takes an infrastructure of a large organization to help deliver and solve those problems to you. And so on one hand, one of the things that we find valuable about our law firms, which is their depth of experience and their ability to have a broad geographic reach, are the very things we tend to forget about and complain about when it comes to figuring out the cost or how those services will be delivered, which is really why segmenting the work is so very important, so that as you make those connections with your law firms about what work we're going to do, you have a better understanding of what is the right size solution to bring to those clients so that actually everyone feels like it's not just a cost and an out of control cost, but really an investment in an outcome.
So, Sadia, when you're in your department, when you're looking at things on a global scale, which you have to, you're a global company, your department operates on a global scale. When you're thinking about, and you and I have spent a good bit of time talking about some of the struggles that you're faced with when you're trying to find the right support in other companies or countries, I'm sorry, especially Asia Pac was the one we specifically were talking about. What have you been able to do as far as finding ways to collaborate with the vendors that you're currently working with or transitioning work or finding somebody to do work in those regions, the right people to do that work?
It's been a really a difficult area outside the US, particularly Asia Pac. And I'm not going to say that we have found that perfect balance. I'm still looking for law firms that can produce the quality of work that we're used to it in the US and in Europe. But at the same time, that can do the billing, right? The billing outside the US, especially using leads, seems to be, sorry, haven't moved, seems to be a bit of a struggle. And when you're using with global law firms, which are US based, the difficulty is that you're paying a high premium. And yes, the quality of work is there, but then the balance of am I willing to pay a paralegal $700 an hour becomes the issue, right? And from that perspective, I'm still struggling to really find um, global law firms that are not top tier, but at the same time that can produce the work that the quality of work that we need and we demand and get used to it from the U.S. perspective. And it's been really a tough journey. And if anyone has suggestions, I'm definitely open to that. I don't have answers for everything, and I think it's one of those things that we have to say, this is an area that I could improve on going forward.
So I think that's where, my perspective is obviously, and again, we've talked about this, that's where the networking perspective really comes into play and being able to have that network of people to ask those questions to and to learn from other people, which is really what we're attempting to do here. And of course, we don't have all of the answers, and there's going to be people in attendance who have ideas, and that's always great. And David, I would love to kind of hear from your perspective on that as well.
Look, this is always a challenging topic, right? Because number one, as I'm learning, being part of a global firm, oftentimes it's hard to compare based on the standards we're used to in one jurisdictions to how work is practiced and done in another jurisdiction, because different customs, cultures, and ways of approaching a problem are there. And so a lot of times having that expectation setting up front helpful, having internal resources to legal project management to make sure that we're continuing to communicate on both those points is very helpful. I think that the point about making sure that you have the right source or the right cost resources doing the work involves a thoughtfulness about, yes, where are those resources located? How are they providing? How much work are they going to provide on that particular matter? And can we have a specific or special alternative fee structure for just that piece, for example, because it doesn't make sense in that jurisdiction to do time and materials like I do elsewhere. I think it would make sense, though, to also understand that from the law firm perspective, the infrastructure costs of having offices in that many jurisdictions has to come into that conversation. There is a piece of that discussion where both people can win or both parties can win because, one, having that continuity of care across multiple jurisdictions does, I think, reduce the delivery risk, does, I think, ultimately lead to lower costs. And so having that infrastructure is important. But to your point, Sadia, I think, leveraging the right resources to do the right work, and having a clear expectation setting on who should be doing what work is very important, because it can seem unnatural to pay a law firm in a particular region U.S. rates, when in fact you can go to that market and perhaps pay in market rates that might be different, but that also does come at a cost beyond the dollar outlay. And I think that's the balance you have to strike.
And I think when you're dealing with different jurisdictions, particularly outside the US, there are costs that generally you don't see it in your day-to-day bills that you review, and the struggle has been really that educational piece. Yes, we hold everyone accountable for signing the billing guidelines and adhering to it, but there is just different cost structure that when they sign, they don't mention it, and all of a sudden, as Alicia knows, I've called her many times saying it, have you ever seen it? Have you ever seen this type of a cost being passed over to us? Is this normal? And having that someone to check, to do sanity check sometimes is really important, especially as you're dealing with outside the US. And the other piece is, Alicia, we talked about this once we tried to bring in its alternative law firm into our mix that basically represented us in multiple jurisdictions in Australia and Asia. And the struggle with that was the fee structure was really good, but the billing compliance was so poor that we ended up dropping the firm. And yes, they did produce decent amount of quality work, but at the same time, we have to balance, do we want to deal with this nightmare of constantly having to reject their invoices and getting into these unnecessary disputes? And the final decision was we decided it wasn't worth it. And we said, thank you, but no thank you, basically moved on. And those are tough decisions sometimes you have to make, which are difficult.
And did you try to do that work in an alternative fee arrangement format at all?
It was actually alternative fee. We were really happy with the fee structure that we had. It's just the billing guideline compliance was a nightmare. It wasn't in lead format. I mean, every time they submitted bills, there was issues. And when it became such a elaborate work that we had to spend to clean up the invoices and constantly being on top of it, we had to say, okay, how much are we spending per week with this law firm alone? And the back and forth, we decided that it wasn't worth the saving. So the relationship ended up being severed due to those type of things.
And was it a flat fee, or was it?
We had alternative fee where it wasn't so much of a flat fee. It depended. So for certain matters, we had a flat fee. Certain matters, we had alternative fee structure. Especially if they were dealing with one contract, but the contract was in multiple jurisdictions. And we had 3 different types of rate structure with them. And they were billing in the local currency, which was heavily negotiated. I mean, I negotiated the fees to come down 25% from their original budgets. So we were extremely happy with the fees, but the headache that came along with managing it wasn't worth to us. And that's why we decided to go back to the drawing board and to seek other firms.
So I think you bring up an excellent point, which is, and I faced a similar frustration, which was, when you engage with the vendor and they understand your goals, but they're unable to actually implement those goals into their systems and into their process, it becomes very frustrating. And so I very much can appreciate that. What I now have a deeper appreciation of, though, as well, is, sometimes what we as clients are asking for is easy to agree to in terms of principle and in terms of alignment of goals, but it's very hard to implement in terms of the technology or how they're actually structured, whether it's the best, most robust ELM system or SAP system or ERP system, or whether it's something more simplified. The truth of the matter is that actually keeping alignment on all of those systems to do that, it becomes a challenge, which is why a lot of times when we move to alternative fee structures, we do talk about, okay, but if we're going to this route, if we're going to reduce our costs and share some of the risk, a lot of times the conversations I have is, then we have to have agreement that we're not going to actually create more administrative burden on our firms in order to deliver that work and in order to report on that work. And so how are we to, or what are the effective methods that we could bill and report to you on what's being done without actually putting more burden and friction into that transaction? And that, I think, is the delicate balance.
Yeah, I mean,
I do agree with you, David, and this is something that we talk to our clients about all the time. Part of our agreements with most of our clients is to do some support of their firms from a billing perspective, and having some compassion, especially now with the stress that they're under and them having to reimagine themselves, is really understanding that while it seems simple that you're asking your firm to abide by your guidelines and you're customizing your e-billing system to match up with those guidelines, and it seems simplistic on your side, you have to understand that in most cases, those firms are having to submit invoices in half a dozen e-billing systems for hundreds, if not thousands, of clients that they're working for. And unfortunately, what ends up happening is the attorneys submit their time into a system that gets put to a biller who then has to put it into another system. And the burden on that biller is tremendous. And we've experienced that. We've done that for some of our clients. We've taken on law firm clients who had a backlog of invoices that were rejected that needed to be resubmitted, and it is an overwhelming task for a lot of them. So I think the real goal is making sure you're supporting your vendors, that you're sending out a clear message, and that you're understanding of what it is you're asking them to do. Training is such a massive part of the success of any technology that you implement, but also the training of your vendors, them understanding how to fix things, where to go to get support if something is wrong, where to go to ask questions, and having that support readily available for them so that most of the time it gets fixed. They typically don't do it again. Most firms don't have any ill will or malice or they're not really trying to mess things up. They really are trying to do their very best, but there's a lot that gets put on them. And I don't think that we really, I certainly didn't until we had a vendor as a client appreciate what the billers go through on a day-to-day basis. And then you have the timely billing policy that most of our clients have. So if it gets messed up and they can't get it resubmitted in time, there's all kinds of issues. So again, just keeping that compassion piece and understanding, I think, is a big part of the collaboration between vendors and clients. You guys have any more thoughts on this collaboration piece? I mean, obviously we've got two sides of the coin, so anything you guys have, I would love to hear.
I think one of the things that now, that I know the amount of efforts it takes for the law firm to input this information into the system, especially, there was one point in my life where I had to reject 80% of everything that was ever submitted. That was a huge undertake from my side, and Alicia firms helped out with those rejections. It wasn't something I enjoyed doing it, but those things happened because we had published a new billing guideline that we established by reviewing multiple companies' billing guidelines, and we picked the best, what we thought was the best for our company. With Alicia's help, put it together. We got it signed by everyone. Everyone agreed to it. We did here and there some training. But what we realized is that firms all of a sudden could not bill what they used to bill in the past. For example, firms were not allowed to bill attending the same call with multiple attorneys, or doing the same work by two people, or certain collaboration wasn't allowed anymore. We weren't allowing percentage of overhead to be billed to us, which was all
other expenses.
Yeah, other expenses. And I remember one time Alicia called me and said, "Hey, Sadia, do you know that you're spending under other category this much of amount?" And my mouth just dropped. I was like, how did we get to that level? And because I was so focused on the line item reviews that I didn't have time to look at these other items that were easily fixable. But and that's, again, the help that sometimes is needed to bring in a third party to help you see things that you wouldn't otherwise see it. And at that time, when we rejected over 80% of the invoices, I've made a lot of enemies with the law firms.
Also giving firms support in that they had a resource to go to, they had somebody to get on the phone with, to share screens with, to walk them through how to make it better. So while it was a struggle, you, I think, put a really great plan in place to be as supportive as you could be to your vendors and to try to be understanding of their perspective as well. So while it was not easy, I think that it was really necessary. And I think at this point, your invoice review process is a lot more streamlined than it was several years ago. And you're still realizing that savings, and your firms have an understanding of what it is they need to be doing. So I think that's really where that's different than what we typically see.
Yeah, it paid off at the end of the day, and years later, we don't see those type of mistakes. Yes, it does happen nowadays, but for years it didn't happen. And one of the things I try to do differently now is that before I reject invoices, knowing that the struggles that firms go through with multiple systems, with everyone having their own billing guidelines, I usually call them, have a candidate discussion about what it is that I'm not comfortable with and the reason why I reject. We talk it through, and based on that understanding, I go into the system, or I tell my billing guideline administrator what they have, the reasons for rejection, and they put it in. So the expectation now is that having that open discussion with them, it does take time, but then that kind of helps out in order to better collaborate and also to build that relationship, because nowadays with fewer firms, it's really important to collaborate and to have a common understanding of what it is that we're all trying to do.
David, do you have anything you want to add?
Yes, I mean, yes, because I think this is an ongoing problem in the work that we do. It's that a lot of these things, when we talk about billing guidelines, which I've written a ton of, and we talk about playbooks, which I've written a ton of, and we talk about invoice review, which is a very necessary part of this process, it always comes back down to price. And so when we're frustrated about the quality, we talk about price. And when we're frustrated about the cost, we talk about price. And we talk about responsiveness, we talk about price. And when we talk about lack of communication, we talk about the price. And the reality of it is the price is only serving as really a proxy for some of the broader issues that really will help the collaboration for the sake of all. And so I think what's interesting as you lay out the billing guidelines, as you do those things, is, again, I go back to comparing that or combining that with, yes, here are the things we're hoping to acquire and obtain with your legal services, but also having that broader discussion around the collaboration, the goals, the outputs. Because, again, the other thing we always measured is not only are we driving costs down, but what are we doing with our outcomes? What are we doing with our speed to resolution, whether that be an M&A or something on the contentious side? I think all of that has to be considered in that discussion. And again, I would also say that the burden is real. I know there's some comment about administrative burden. The burden is real on the corporate side. I've lived through it. I've spent as much time dealing with those things as all of you have kind of outlined. But I would say this, the burden is real on both sides. And as an organizations, we need to come up with a better way. And so I think we deal with something north of 800 different custom code sets for the UTBMS codes. I think that when it comes down to actually figuring out how to partition the work, that actually the UTBMS codes as currently laid out don't actually do a really good job at that. And that changes need to come around that, and standardization needs to come. I think the way that corporate law departments think about their work and segment their work is probably the better way to think about segmenting their work. And yet a lot of law firms are really focused on dividing that work based on practice group or based on what's a managerial view of the law firm and how they actually compensate themselves. And there needs to be an alignment of those things in order to come to some understanding of what data are we looking at and how do we match that up. And so those are broader problems that are going to continue to sit here until we can get through some of those questions. And as a result, we just keep trying to solve it line by line, guideline by guideline. And we keep wondering why 20 years after we started this discussion, we still have some of these concerns, issues, and questions, right?
Absolutely. So I'm going to move on to our last slide here, and I think we talked through most of this, but I wanted to give you guys sort of an open forum opportunity to talk through that better than we were before piece. And we've talked a lot about that, and that was really the whole point of all of this is what can we do as a department, as an individual, for our employees, for our vendors, to be better? How can we collectively be better than we were before? What is it about our collaboration and the questions we're asking and our processes that will push us in a direction that, as legal operations as a whole with our vendors, how can we be better every day than we were 2 months ago, 2 weeks ago? So, David, I'll ask you first if you have anything to add.
Look, I'm going to start with, we have to be better than we were before, because before already happened. This is different than 08 because 08 already happened. Work was brought in-house where it could be brought in-house. We saw triple-digit growth in the number of in-house lawyers over the last 10 years in terms of in-house lawyers. Law firms who were serious about working with their clients actually then did some of those cost savings initiatives in their own house to try to make and provide better and more efficient functions in law firms. And while there's still work to do, a lot of that work has been happening. And so then we do have to be better, but we also have to be different than before. And so what does that mean? Well, maybe it does mean more kind of collaboration and leveraging of different legal service providers or ways of delivering the service, whether it's an embedded ALSP or whether it's some of the other ALSPs out there. I think that's an important piece of it. I think we have to be better in terms of building in the disciplines that all of you in legal operations and what I grew up with in terms of connecting with our businesses. I think our firms need to be better at understanding what those disciplines are and how to actually evolve those within the law firms that they work for and continue to evolve those on a more broad basis. And I think that is something that we have to do better, because the work is not going away. The leverage we had is not going away. The complexity actually just keeps growing year over year. And so we have to keep continuing to evolve on that journey of how do we solve that problem.
Sadia, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and for us is, what worked in the past will not work today. What got you there yesterday is not going to get you there tomorrow. And we have to look at, ways to come up with process efficiencies while keeping costs down or maintaining the same budget, which is so difficult, as David talked about. The amount of work that we handle is much more complex than 2 years ago or 3 years ago. You can't hire enough in-house specialties to keep up with the demand. And you need to come up with innovative ways to maintain the level of work or services that you used to produce in the past with fewer resources. And what that entails is, for example, the things I talked about it. We brought in-house billing guideline reviewer from India to help us do the day-to-day work. We brought Mosaic Consulting to help us with the strategies and how do we automate some work so that we can utilize the best technology out there and tell us what we don't know. There's always going to be the unknown. You don't know everything, and acknowledging that. Helping establishing guidelines, playbooks helps a lot internally when you have turnover or just things are happening so quick to keep up with that change. And the second piece is really looking at law firms. You're not able to do lunches anymore to really build that relationship or maintain that relationship. People are moving around a lot nowadays than they used to be. And one of the things that helps is picking up that phone and having that open communication, over communicate than ever before. Asking your employees, how are you doing on a day-to-day basis? You know, having that ability to do video conference. And the same thing with your firms that we work with day in, day out, to make sure that, you know, everyone is sound and not just looking at one aspect of the cost side, which I tend to focus on, but there's the other piece, the human aspect of it, and not forgetting that. And basically bringing in the resources that you need to make a change in the world, and also looking at alternative companies that can really help you drive that cost saving that we all need to achieve, because budgets are not going to get increased. While law firms' rates I'm seeing going up, but our budgets are going down sometimes. And keeping that open channel with the law firm and being honest with everyone of what the expectations are, and having that open communication goes a long way.
I think the expectation on work product is not changing. It's increasing. That want for what you're getting from your vendors, myself as a consultant included, that perfection that is expected, that going above and beyond that is expected. And I don't think that we're going to see vendors shying away from that. I mean, there's a lot of competition in the space. We all know that. I think that when we're talking about the concept of being better than we were before, there is that compassion component and understanding that everybody's kind of figuring out their new way of doing things. We had a lot of clients in the very beginning that couldn't even get access to their systems because of VPN issues at home. There was all kinds of struggles that they were dealing with. And you know, those things are happening to a lot of people. And again, we're overcoming them very quickly, and we're showing how well we can adapt as a department, as a division of legal or as of corporations. And I think that's really amazing. As far as from my perspective, you know, we work with companies that have 3 lawyers. We work with companies that have 1,000. And I think what we're really seeing across the board is a reduction in the size of the departments and a need for the same or more support. So finding creative ways to improve process and finding creative ways to utilize resources that maybe you wouldn't before, or technologies that you wouldn't before, integrating systems to alleviate manual process. All of those little administrative pieces can add up to a lot of time savings and increase the bandwidth of the individuals that you do have, of the support you do have within your organization. So I think being better does come from being more efficient while still providing the same level of expertise that everybody has come to expect, regardless of the position you're in, from company to vendor. It really doesn't matter. The expectation is the same. So learning to find ways to be more efficient, I think, is how we're going to improve and be better.
And I think another piece of it is, as one of my business coach taught me years ago, I was sharing that example with Colin yesterday. It's really asking uncomfortable questions, asking unreasonable questions, you know, such as what I've asked the law firm that when we moved from one firm to the other, to say, look, there's going to be 2 weeks of transition, can't pay 2 companies at the same time. I need you. I'm giving you a lot more work than I did in the past. I would like to see some serious savings, and asking for those type of questions. You may not get the 2 weeks, but you will get somewhere. And a lot of people shy away from these uncomfortable questions, but unless you ask, you will never know what you're going to get. And those type of things do help build expectation, but all, at the same time, better relationships in a long term.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we've got just a couple of minutes left. I think we've got some questions down here. I know one of them, so there's been a lot of conversation about the playbook. So Colin, I don't know if you want to kind of jump in and maybe ask a couple of these questions.
Yeah.
That are in here.
So
Perfect.
I'm going to jump in real quick and ask an unreasonable question for the panel. I would like kind of your unique perspective, and I know you kind of touched on this throughout the presentation, but like as a consultant from a global corporation, and David, I think Baker McKinsey is the biggest law firm on the planet. Like how you guys, you talked about like approaching like AFAs and getting value there. how, from your unique perspectives, do you approach like value-based pricing? Going back to the collaboration, getting a prize from a corporation. Like, how do you think about it as a consultant? Do you have a process in place for a corporation? And then, as a law firm, how are you thinking about like adding value to your clients through a value-based pricing perspective?
So from my perspective, obviously AFAs have a lot to do with the type of work being done, the volume of work being done, the breakdown of the organization. All of those things play a role. I do think AFAs they've always been there, but they're certainly the hot topic at the moment. We've seen a lot of success, but you have to be careful. And we were talking about this earlier, and it's something that I've seen even with Sadia and the company that she was talking about, that she negotiated these rates. What ended up happening, and again, not all firms are like this, most of them are not, but it is something that we see. They just ended up submitting everything as a partner. And even when it was something that was very trivial or could have been done by a legal assistant or a paralegal, and they didn't want that rate, they wanted everything billed at the partner rate. So you do have to be careful when you're negotiating AFAs. That doesn't mean that, okay, that's it, check the box, we're getting great rates. You still have to be paying attention when the bills come in to make sure that timekeepers are billing for the proper work, that the tasks that are being performed by the right level of individual. So that's part of it. Time and materials is obviously another one we do see. It's less often, or just negotiating a flat rate. That's probably the most common. And we do see it a lot, and it can be really successful, but you can't just let your guard down, like I said, and check the box and say, okay, I got a good rate and I can move on now. So that's my perspective. So David, do you want to talk about it from your side?
Yeah, and I would say a couple of things. There are a couple of folks in the marketplace who talk a lot about value-based billing and are actually pretty good at it. And I'm spying on them because I see they're actually on this call. I think that's worth talking to them about. But I would say this, there's a couple of things about value. Value is really defined by the client, not by the vendor providing the service. I think that's true. But how realistic those discussions are, or how realistic it is to figure out how to measure that value, has to be a collaborative effort. And so I would say that value really is about that alignment of purpose, incentive, and goals at the front end. And then how are we actually going to get there, and what are the trade-offs to get there, whether it's speed, whether it's leverage, whether it's capability, whether it's type of resource that's going to actually get to or deliver those particular services. So I think that's the first thing we have to remember, is value is defined by the client, but it has to be defined by the client. And a lot of times they can't define that, or they define it and yet they chicken out at the last minute. And we've all done this, because they don't really know how to express whether they've got a good deal, whether they are clear on the business value. And so rather than talk about, this is the value we're paying for this particular outcome, they say, well, it's easier to measure that I got a discount off of their particular rates. That's something tangible I can hold on to. Let me talk about that. And I think one of the things that's interesting is there's a lot of news in the press about a recent matter where a law firm settled the matter in a very efficient way, and actually to the benefit of their client in a very financially beneficial way. And when they asked for their agreed to rate, which was north of $185 million, all of a sudden people didn't want to have the value discussion anymore. They want to talk about, well, what was the prospective hourly rate if I actually take the number of hours and divide it by the total win, or what you're asking for, that's some astronomical rate north of $18,000 per hour. But you can't really do that, because again, if we're going to talk about outputs, then let's talk about outputs, and let's stop then focusing back on inputs, because we don't really know how to demonstrate, discuss, or measure value in those other ways. And I think that's always the challenge corporate law departments have. It's definitely a challenge that law firms have. And I think the way you get to that is by having more clarity around what is it that we're actually going to focus on in terms of what is value, how do I measure those outcomes, and then how do I get everyone comfortable with that?
Perfect. It looks like we're running up on the top of the hour, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time here. So I'll pick one more question. It looks like we kind of went over Aaron's question about value from firms there a little bit. So Jamie Fraser says, I really like the message of building relationships and it being a personal business. How do you feel about new tech? Not that new, around reverse auction fits with this. Anybody?
I've never liked reverse auctions. I think racing to the bottom in terms of a fee structure doesn't address the total cost of outcome or what resources you're trying to bring. And I felt that way in-house. I've never used reverse auctions. I think it also drives and incentivizes bad behavior, which is to say that, if I want a law firm to be very capable and have great resources for me, then I can't keep driving them to the bottom and then expect them to have those resources available to me when I actually need them to go to bat for me on something big and major. And so I think the whole reverse auction game also leaves too much granularity, or doesn't give enough granularity, and leaves too much open in terms of what ultimately will be decided or provided, because scope changes, matters change, the outcomes will vary because there's a whole series of unknown things, and it doesn't build in discipline across the whole delivery of the legal work. And I think that's what causes them to be problematic in my eyes.
Perfect. It looks like, guys, we're at the top of the hour. I want to give the last word to Alicia, but first of all, I want to begin by thanking first of all our attendees for coming. Really appreciate your participation. Just housekeeping, I'll follow up with the video. Expect an email from our good friend Tammy French at Mosaic, who'll be following up. And our panel, this is wonderful discussion. You guys, you're all hard hitters, and we're so appreciative for your time. Hand it over to Alicia if you want to say any parting words.
No, I do. I appreciate everybody's time. David and Sadia, thank you for jumping on and doing this with me and providing some perspective on a path forward. And it was really interesting. And thank you all so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.